For this part of the lesson, what we're going to do is talk about some algebra review. The focus here will be on factoring, so going back to what you know about factoring and reviewing it a little bit. We will also then go down and talk about systems of equations as a reminder of that review that we've done. So first of all, when we talk about quadratics, remember quadratics are when you have, for instance, an x squared in the problem and how to factor those. So the steps we want to use for factoring these, the first step you want to use is you want to get 0 on one side. So we get 0 on one side of the equation. The next step is what you want to do is factor it. Now, factoring to solve an equation, you could also, I'm going to put as a side note, you could use the quadratic formula. But that would be a different lesson, a different time. We're going to focus on this lesson on factoring. So just as a reminder, the quadratic formula can solve all the quadratics as well. And then the third step we want to make sure we do is once we've factored it, we set each factor equal to 0. And solve. That's called the zero product property. Okay, so we've got an example problem here. Let's try this one. We start off with this, and my recommendation is that when you have an x squared in the problem, that you get 0 on the other side of the x squared. That keeps that x squared at the positive coefficient. So I'm going to subtract 8x from both sides. So I'll have x squared minus 8x, and I'm going to subtract 20. That will get 0 on the right side of the equation. Now we're going to factor this. Let me remind you of what that means. We're looking for two binomials that multiply together to get this x squared minus 8x minus 20. Now there's several ways that you may have done this in the past. One way is to think of two numbers that multiply together give you negative 20 and add together give you negative 8. Let's look at a box method though that will help maybe review something you've seen before or explain why that works. So I'm going to put a box down here. And in this box, I'm going to put in the first box here, x squared. I'm going to put down to the bottom corner down here, the negative 20. Now, what we're going to do is we're looking to see on the outside of this box what things multiply to give us those. So we're talking about multiplication. So first of all, to get x squared, I've got an x and an x will give me that x squared. So that's the first thing that we can start with. This negative 20, we have several options. You could go with 20 and negative 1, or negative 20 and positive 1, or a combination of, for instance, having 4 times 5, with one of them being negative. What I'm going to use, though, is 10 and 2, because if I make the 10 negative and the 2 positive, that will multiply together, give me this negative 20, so negative 10, and then positive 2, and they add together to give me that negative 8. So that's the clue that I'm going to use. Let's check it out, see if it works. X times negative 10 is negative 10x, and x times 2 is a positive 2x. When I look at these two and add those two together, 2x plus negative 10x gives me that negative 8x. So it works in how we factor it. That's how the box method can help us organize our work in order to see what factors into. So I get x minus 10 and x plus 2. Now when I set each of those equal to 0, so we go x minus 10 equals 0, and x plus 2 equals 0 for my two equations. Now add 10 to both sides, you get x equal to 10. Subtract 2 from both sides, you get x equal to negative 2. Those are my two answers that if I were to substitute those back into this original equation, they would both work, and they're the only numbers that would work. Those are my solutions to it. All right, let's take a look at this one. What I'd like you to do to start off with on this one is I would like you to try, first of all, pause the video and try multiplying this out as an algebra review. See what you get by doing that. So pause and try it. Now that you've tried that, let's go ahead and do it together. Remember, this is the double distributive where you go x times x and get x squared, and x times 1 and get 1x. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the negative 1, double distribute it. So negative 1 times x and negative 1 times 1. So I get negative 1x, and then negative 1 times positive 1 is negative 1. And that still equals this 2x squared. I'm going to just leave that alone for right now because it's all multiplied through. Okay, now simplify on this side. Notice the 1x and the negative 1x are similar terms. When I add them, I get no more x's. So I have x squared minus 1 on this side equal to my 2x squared plus 8x plus 11. Now my next step is, once I've simplified that, let's go ahead and get 0 on one side of the equation. I'm going to subtract an x squared from both sides. That will keep my x squared coefficient positive, which is just more convenient when factoring. So if I subtract x squared from both sides, I'm going to also add 1 to both sides. So I'll get 0 here, and when I subtract x squared, I get a 1x squared here. That 8x is no similar term, so I'm going to leave it as 8x. Then I'm going to add 1 to that and get a 12. Now let's go ahead and have you pause the video, see if you can use this box method or whatever technique you know, and try to factor this into two binomials. We want it to be two things that multiply together to equal that trinomial. So try that. See if you can do it by pausing the video. Now that you tried that, let's see how you did. So if we make a box over here for this, just to organize our work, I'm going to put an x squared. 1x squared is the same as just x squared. And I'm going to put a 12 down in this box down here. Now, I separate out the x squared into x and x. And the 12, I've got many options. It could be 12 and 1, negative 12 and negative 1. The hint here is, since that's a positive 8 in the middle, I'm going to use both positives. I could try 3 and 4. I could do 6 and 2. Now, when I think about those different combinations that multiply together give me 12, this bottom box here, the two that add together give me 8 are 6 and 2. So I'm going to try those two. Let's see if it worked. So x times 6 gives me 6x for this box. X times 2 gives me 2x for this one. Notice that these add together to give me that 8x in the middle. That's my those are my factors. X plus 6 and x plus 2. Now, once I've got them factored, I set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So x plus 6 equals 0 will give me x equals negative 6. And then the x plus 2 equal to 0. Subtract 2 and you get x equal to negative 2 for my answer. So there are my two answers that will work in that original equation to solve it. Now, let's go ahead and do a review problem. This review problem is a system of equations problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a system of equations, and to do that, I'm going to look at each of these circles separately. So the first thing I want to do is with this circle, I'm going to set, because these are both radii, radius and a radius are going to be equal, so 3x is going to equal y. Over here, I'll do the same thing. These two radii are congruent, so I'll set their measures equal. 4x plus 2y is equal to 20. Now what I want to do is say that I've got two variables in two equations. That's a system of equations. I'm going to use substitution to solve it. And what I mean by that is if I take this 3x, I can put it into the other equation for y and solve for just x. So I'm going to have 4x plus 2 times, and I'm going to take out the y, and I'm going to put in its place, I'm going to put this 3x in its place, because that's what it equals, so I can substitute. 4x plus 6x is going to equal 20. If I go ahead and add those together, I get 10x equal to 20. Divide by 10, and I get x equal to 2. Now, what we can do is find y by going back to the original. I've got 3x equal to y is one of my original equations. I could use either one. This is probably the easier one to use. Put 2 in for that, and I get y equal to 3 times 2, so y equals 6. So my solution is x equals 2 and y equals 6. So I can use factoring to solve equations. I can also use systems of equations to solve. And I'll oftentimes be doing that in the context of some geometry problem in these algebra review problems.